And we're back, Jonathan.
Another episode
of the Road to Code. Man, we got some ground to cover this week. We ended up creating an episode 10 with not one, not two, not three, not even 4 parts, but 5-part episode. And we're going to be releasing those week to week as it goes by. It took us a while to get through that episode 10, but I think there was we covered a lot of ground.
Yep.
If you are starting with C# and you want to see what it takes to get through and access data, you have to go look at parts 1 through 5 of episode 10. Yeah. So you have a new background.
Yeah, I'm in a new place. I had a move, so we actually missed a week of recording.
We did miss a week.
But I am in a new undisclosed location. I have an office now.
Very cool. Your office is how many steps from your bedroom?
It's just a sliding door. Just go over there. It's not even... I could do 1 step if I wanted to.
1 step. What a commute. Yeah. We didn't record. I didn't know what to do with my extra time. I was, I finished all my projects on my side. And I kind of sat around twiddling my fingers for about 30 seconds. And I was like, oh, I know what I need to do. And got up and did it. But definitely missed you last week. But I know you had to go and get ready to move and whatnot. So you were on your crunch time. But you're currently going through some training videos to learning React.
Yes.
How's so in comparison, so you already went through HTML, you went through the basics, the intermediate stuff, and you even went through some advanced stuff with HTML, right?
Mm-hmm.
You did some CSS, like a beginning, intermediate, and you even went through some like advanced stuff as well with CSS. And then you went through and you learned JavaScript. And you did a couple iterations of that, because the first one was learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then you went back and we added an additional layer of complexity, which is working with Git.
Mm-hmm.
So you learned the basics of Git, and then you went back and learned HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from a whole different set of videos. But this time what you were doing is you were integrating Git into your learning process. So you created the repo, did some work, checked it in. You went through the whole pull request process, creating branches, merging branches, all that good stuff. You learned a whole heck of a lot of command line entries. And then I think in episode 10, one of the parts, I showed you how to do it through Visual Studio, which was like a hot knife going through butter.
Yeah.
It was like so easy. You're like, why did you ever show me this way?
It's just like 2 buttons instead of like a whole bunch of command line stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think it was very intuitive for you to pick up what Visual Studio was doing in the back end,
Mm-hmm.
had you not gone through that whole command line series, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a lot easier to understand how Git pulls the repo from whatever you're working on and stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was almost natural for you. You actually knew all the terminology, pull, push, it's like all that stuff just is like, oh, this is how I push. Oh, this is how I get. This is how, it's like, what? It's like, this is easy, But it would have been a lot more difficult had you not gone through that command line process. And I'm sorry I put you through it. I went through it. I think everybody should go through that whole command line process, because there's going to be things that you cannot do within Visual Studio that you would normally do through the command line. So when you're working with when you're working with HTML and CSS and JavaScript, each individual piece of technology is clearly identifiable. Is it not?
Mm-hmm.
HTML belongs in an HTML file. CSS belongs in a CSS file. JavaScript belongs in a JS file. You can mix it all up within the HTML, but they come with their own tags.
Yeah.
Or you reference the file, one of the two, right? Tell me what it's been like to learn React after learning the traditional, programming paradigm of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
I feel like with React, it just blobs everything together really. Like you're using all that stuff in different ways that I didn't even know was possible really. Cuz like you can do JavaScript stuff in your like or you can do HTML stuff in your JavaScript writing. So like it just makes it so much easier and like more concise too.
Where normally you would do JavaScript in your HTML,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
kind of reverse the paradigm. And
Yeah.
they're like, no, you should be able to do JavaScript in your or HTML in your JavaScript, huh?
Yeah. It
Yeah.
just yeah, it makes you understand that like or I feel like you have to understand HTML, CSS, and JavaScript separately to kind of understand how it all works too. Because like some of these things blend together, and it makes it if someone's barely learning, I could see if how it makes it more confusing for them. But yeah, I like it.
All right. All right. Um, let's see. There was a in the videos, he talks about what is actually going on with the J. Are you using the JSX extension or are you using the JS extension?
Just JS.
JS, okay. They're interchangeable. You can actually use JSX because it's not HTML that you're putting in your code. It's actually called something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
what is it called?
I forget. I don't remember.
Let me look it up really. I don't want to use the wrong terminology here. So they're describing it as React code, but it really is JS is an XML, HTML like syntax used by React that extends ECMAScript so that XML, HTML like text coexist with JavaScript / React code. But there was a name that I remember they were using. I guess it is called JSX code. Yeah. Yeah, it's JSX code, I think it's called, is what they eventually settled on. Because they did they kind of stayed with JSX. So yeah, I mean, it's a way that, and the thing is that the browser doesn't really understand this code.
Mm-hmm.
Do you realize that? Do you understand that part?
Not really. It's weird that it just updates like right on the spot too. Like if you just save it, it just updates right away.
Yeah, there's a lot of magic going on. There's definitely a lot of magic going on. Yeah, I don't want to turn this episode into a React episode because that's not what this is about. But I just wanted to see where you're at, what's still mystical to you. And React definitely has, and I'm using the word metaphorically. There's a lot of mysticism going on in React, right?
Mhm.
And the fact that unless you learn about transpilers, you're not going to understand where the magic is happening. And the thing about computers is that there's never any magic. There's always things that kind of happen in the background that you may not be aware of because you're not exposed to it, or you're not familiar with the process or technology or whatever the case is. But there's no magic. I mean, there's something that's happening. There's always a point where the rubber has to hit the road. There's just never any flying car syndrome. It's like the rubber's always on the road when it comes to anything technology. But how you get there is where the magic kind of happens, right? I think it'll be worth talking about just before we get into some of the React episodes. And I don't know what episode this would be, but it would be worth to talk about transpilers. I think it'll be something just so that it gives you an understanding of what React is doing, because there's definitely some really cool stuff going on. Just like C#, you're using expressive syntax, right? Where you're saying int I is equal to 0. And then in the next line, you say I++, which basically increases the value of I by 1. That expressive code has to be converted to an intermediate language, right? Which is compiled down to a language that then gets compiled down to the processor. Eventually, that expressive code has to make it down to ones and zeros, machine code that the processor can understand. And so that's the whole thing about compilers, is that they take your expressive code and turn it into machine language. Well, with JSX, you have to understand JavaScript in order to program in JSX, because JSX is a superset of JavaScript. In other words, it does more than what JavaScript is capable of. Just by the mere fact that you can include HTML in your JavaScript versus include JavaScript in your HTML, this is like the reverse effect, right? You're including HTML in your JavaScript. There's a transpilation. So it's transforming that JSX code into JavaScript, essentially, is what it's doing. So what gets rendered to the browser is pure JavaScript. You cannot take JSX and just give it to the browser and expect it to run. It doesn't understand it. The only thing that a browser understands is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are the only 3 things it understands. So you can program in JSX, you can program in Angular, you can program in C#, you can program with ASP.NET, PHP, anything. Take WordPress, which is written in PHP. It produces HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So JSX has to be transformed into JavaScript. And there's what they call a transpilation process that takes place that then gets pushed down to the browser as JavaScript.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so it'll be a good thing for us to, in the future, to look at transpilers just to see what they're doing just before we get into the whole React thing. And so, but I kind of knew that there was going to be a lot of magic for you. You're like, wow, this is cool. It just refreshes, like, here, let me make a change. Like, wow, it refreshes. Very cool. All right. That's cool. What else you got, Jonathan?
We have merch available now.
What? Share your screen and tell us all about it.
All right. I didn't pull it up yet, but I can do that right now. Here we go. So we got shirts, we got mugs, we got women's shirts, and a tote.
A tote.
Yeah. Wait, could you see it?
No,
Oh.
you're not sharing anything yet. Oh,
Okay.
now you are.
Boom.
What? So
Tees
you
for
got women's classic tees, you got men's classic tees, you have a tote bag, and a coffee mug.
Yep. So it has the logo I made, and then just the website. Our
That
website,
is very cool.
roadtocode.net.
All right. This is really cool. I think I think what we should do, Jonathan, is we should do a drawing.
Okay.
A drawing. And this drawing is going to go over, let's see, when would this episode be released?
Next month.
So
Okay.
from June 1st through June 30th, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification so that you're notified when new episodes are released.
Yep.
And your name will be entered into a raffle to win one of the women's t-shirt, a man's t-shirt, a tote bag, or a coffee mug. It's going to be your choice as to what it is that you want. So we're laying down the gauntlet here. Subscribe and hit the bell, and that's going to enter your name into a raffle. And the winner will be announced June. Can you go back to the calendar?
Oh, yeah. June
27th. Ooh, are we going to record July 4th?
I will. We're gonna have to take another break on that week. I'm gonna be out of town.
You're going to be out of town that week?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we announce it on the 27th?
27 sounds good.
All right. So the winner will be announced on the 27th. We will take all the people that have subscribed and hit the bell for notifications, and your name will be put into a drawing, and we will pull that name on the 27th. And can you contact them through YouTube?
Yeah, through YouTube, you can message them.
Okay, so you can we'll message you, and we'll give you the choice of a mug, a tote, a men's t-shirt or a woman's t-shirt, whatever size is available. We will, you can give us your size, and hopefully we'll get the closest size that we can get to. If you're a double X small, there may be only small or maybe extra small. We may not be able to go to a double X small. So you can't put it on your puppy or your adult, your toddler or anything like that. I don't think it's for kids. I think it's for adult size, right?
Yeah, adult sizes.
So yeah,
dog clothes should be next. Imagine this logo on a dog shirt.
I like it. The road to code, watching your dog. All right. Well, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this show, Jonathan.
All right.
Let's open up Visual Studio and let's talk about what we've done so far in our 5-part episode 10. We created a project where we broke up the layers into a console application that would call a repository, and the repository would call the data. And then the console, the data, and the repository utilize the model project to pass data in between the layers back and forth, right? So you can create a request, and that request would get processed, and then you would get a response back. and that response would be displayed on the screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this isn't in modern day programming. Maybe back in the 60s and 70s, when terminals were the big thing, this was probably the norm. In modern technology and modern programming, you have graphics, you have high-end graphics, not
Mm-hmm.
just like, a bunch of characters on the screen. You actually have like, 8,000 pixels in some cases. But you have at a minimum 4K resolution, which means that we can actually use something graphical. And so in order to do that, we would have to turn that console application into an API. And basically an API is an application programming interface. And it's a way that you can call in to get certain information. So you go and create a request, and that request returns a response. And that response then gets translated through a data format called Json. And it's not your buddy Json, it's nothing to do with your buddy. It's an acronym. It's JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And so that particular format is a JavaScript-like format that allows you to create objects. Let's open up your browser and show an example really quick of what that looks like. And you can just right-click anywhere on your screen and go to inspect. Bless you. Live show, guys. Live show. No editing. You get the sneezes. You get the coughing. We get frogs in our throat. You're gonna hear us. Arr, arr, arr. Let's go over to the console. And let's create an object called var. We'll do like var x equals. And then open up the curly braces, and then you can just type in name. And then just put your name, Jonathan. Or, you do the colon, and then inside some quotes, you could just put your name, Jonathan. And then after that, you could put a comma. And then put, you got to close your quote first before the comma. And then put a comma, and then put age, colon, and then just put a number. I don't know. How old are you? 14, 15 right now? You're not 27. Come on. When did you grow up? No semicolon. You gotta you go ahead and close off your curly brace. No comma at the end. And so here we have an object. Go ahead and press enter. We have an object that is represented by the variable x. So we gave it a blueprint. We said, hey, here's the object that we need you to put in memory. So you can hit x.name, press enter, and see what you get. Gonna press enter.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Or x.age. And you get the properties of that object, right? Mm-hmm. But you'll notice the notation that we used. The notation has curly braces. We didn't, in C#, this is different, right? You have to go and actually create an object in a file, and then go and call the constructor and say, var x equals new, and then whatever that type is that you created, so it's a little bit more explicit. Mm-hmm. Where JavaScript is a little bit more loosey-goosey type of thing. It's like, yeah, what do you want to create? Yeah, I'll create it for you. Sure, give it to me, type of thing. So it allows you to be dynamic in that sense. You don't have to be explicit about identifying your types. So this particular format, what's his name? Crockford, Douglas Crockford, created the data format called JSON, because let's go ahead and use everything that you typed in, the curly brace, the name, the age, all that stuff, put that inside of double quotes. Okay, and then before that, go ahead and back arrow once. Yeah. In here, put var z equals, and then put eval, E-V-A-L. And then put parentheses around that whole thing. And remove that space between eval and the parenthesis. And then press enter. Oh, eval refused to evaluate the screen because it's unsafe to allow source script following content. Oh, okay, go ahead and click on that Chrome test. And then right click on it and then go to the console. See if it's in there, hit up arrow. Yeah, there it is, hit enter. Oh.
Colon.
Expected. Unexpected token. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, well, let me explain what eval used to do. Obviously, they've become a little bit more secure with JavaScript, but eval would take any string and run it through the compiler, through the JavaScript interpreter, and execute whatever was in there. So essentially what you would do is you would execute what you have in there. I wonder, oh, you know what? Maybe we need to put the var z equals inside the double quote. Let's do that.
Oh, okay. So the whole thing.
Yeah, just go ahead, up arrow. And then get rid of the var z equals and put it inside the double quote. Try that. Oh, now do z.name. What?
Cool.
So you can see where we put everything as a string, and when we evaluate it, it actually executes it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do the same thing with JavaScript object notation, but what Crockford did, Douglas Crockford did, was he actually put some safety nets around it. And he made it so that you can't just go and create some kind of malicious code inside of JSON format, the data format called JSON. And he protects it from that. And so this whole eval thing, I don't even know if it's actually used. It might be used inside the JSON, but it's something that is very protective, and you can't just go and put malicious code in there. It has to be a valid data format, and that data format needs to follow a specific standard, and that's where JSON comes in. So you can transport, this JSON data format. It's a very lightweight type of data format that you can send back and forth, and essentially being able to send some very lightweight data. Your calls are very small bytes of data get sent back and forth, and they become very fast, because the less bytes you transfer from one location to another, the better your performance is going to be. So that's essentially what's going on with JSON. And I'm not going to pretend to know what's inside of this whole layer of taking a string of what looks like JavaScript and turning it into an actual object. I'm going to say that there's some magic going on, and where the rubber hits the road, I don't know. And I really don't care, because I just work with it. I don't care how it actually works, as long as it works for me, type of thing. But that's essentially what's going on. let's go back to Visual Studio for a moment. So with Visual Studio, we've been working organically with objects. So even when you're inside the console, when you go and call a request object, you're building an object organically within C#. And so what we want to do now is we want to be able to expose everything that you've done through the console. We're gonna just rip it, and we're gonna say, here's the API, and here's what used to be the console, but this is now going to be an HTML page.
Okay.
That's epic. You're like, okay.
That's something new. I'm excited to see how this turns out.
All right. Let's go ahead and create an API project. So let's go ahead and right click on the solution. And let's add a new project. And this project is going to be a web. So type up in the search, type in API. There we go. So what we're going to want is, you see down at the bottom, it says ASP.NET Core Web Application. That first option, which is ASP.NET Web Core Application, that's the one we want. And it's be significant.api. .api.
Oh.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Now let's go ahead and click on the, go ahead and select ASP.NET Core 5.0. And then let's choose the second one. This isn't, there we go. So you see, watch, if you toggle between the first and the second, you'll see where the enable open API appear and reappear. Mm-hmm. So we want that enabled. So that's the way we want it. And we'll go ahead and configure it for HTTPS. That's fine. There's a trick in Postman that I need to show you to be able to fix a problem that occurs when you're using self-signed certificates. All right, let's go and create that. Nice. So you see how you got the significant API project, and then go ahead and collapse all your projects. If you hover over the icons on top, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th icon, pretty much in the middle, right over the solution, right over the solution. The one next to the opposite arrows, one more to the right. Yeah, click on that. Collapses everything. Now, you'll notice that the console app is what's bold. So what's happening is that bold means that it's your startup project. What we want to do is we want to switch it so that the API is your startup project.
Okay.
So right click on it and set it as startup project. Now you see that that's bold. Mm-hmm. So what we could do is, let's just make sure that this is going to work. So go ahead and press play right up in the center where it says IIS Express. Yes. So this is, so don't ask me again. And okay. And I hit yes again. So this is creating a self-signed certificate. Now, let me explain a little bit about what that does. When you create a secured website, you're essentially creating an agreement between the server and whoever's browsing your website. And you're agreeing that the communication between the two machines is going to be secure and encrypted. Okay. And the way that the encryption happens is by the use of this SSL certificate. It's called a secure socket layer certificate. And so that enforces that exchange happens. And when the communications get sent back to the machine, it encrypts the data in such a manner that when the machine receives the data of the web page, because it has the certificate, it could decrypt it.
Okay.
And so it's almost like you and I talking, and we've agreed that this is called a mouse. Nobody else knows that this is a mouse. Okay. So you and I have agreed on that. And so when I say, hey, take the mouse and use it to click on the link, everyone else would think, a mouse? They're going to think the actual rodent. But because you and I have this agreement that this is called a mouse and this is what you're going to use to click, it would be you and I that know. Everyone else is kind of like, whoa, they're using a mouse to click a link? It's like, what the heck? It's like, that doesn't even make sense. If you were to say that back in the 1960s, they're like, what the heck are you talking about? But that's essentially what's happening in a very, very simplified form. That's what's happening between two machines, is that there is an exchange of a key. And so that key is used to encrypt the data. And so when the browser receives the information to display the website, the machine takes that key and decrypts the data and then shows you the unencrypted version of it. And the same thing, when it sends the data back to the server, it encrypts it and it sends it to the server so that whatever is being sent is scrambled. And when the server receives it, it decrypts it and reads the data, reads the input that the user had given it. So if it's a username and password, it's not sent over plain text. It's actually using secured socket layer, which encrypts the data. And then that communication gets encrypted and decrypted when it's sent and received. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what happens is that the SSL certificates, there's an authority. And that authority says, here is the tree of certificates that I own. And if that tree doesn't come all the way up to the authority, then that certificate is false. It's not that your secured connection is compromised. It's just saying, I don't know the authenticity of this certificate. Take your chance if you want. I did not give the authority to this website. Excuse me. I did not give the authority to this website to display data in an encrypted form. And so there is no check of authenticity. So what's happening is that when you're running locally on your environment, and you can see on the browser address, it says localhost : 44352. It's no longer using the default port 80 that represent HTTP. It's using a different port. And so what happens is that when you're trying to encrypt data using a different port, and aside from that, you're using a self-signed certificate, right? Most browsers would just gawk at that. They're like, like, what is this? It's like, we don't understand this, or we don't want to deal with this type of thing. But what's happening is that you've allowed the browser to say, hey, it's okay to use this certificate. I'm authorizing. You, as the machine owner, become the certificate authority and say, this is a valid certificate, and use the certificate to encrypt the communication. Even though it's within the same machine, use the certificate to encrypt the data and the communication between the server process and the browser process, even though it's all within the same machine. Okay.
Okay.
So let's take that URL. Actually, I'm sorry. Go down to where it says get and click on that blue stripe. Yeah, click on that blue stripe. Okay, now this particular URL is going to be localhost 44352/weathercast. All right. So let's grab that first part of the URL. And let's go over to Postman and plug that in there. And then go back to the browser. Oh, you're gonna type it in? You can type it in if you want.
Okay. I could copy it too. Whoops.
Okay. Yeah, get rid of the double slash. And then press send. Do you see how it says SSL error, unable to verify the first certificate?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the only certificate. So Postman is saying, hey, look, I wanted to go up the chain of certificates in the tree of the valid certificates of the one authority. And I wanted to check to see who that authority is. The problem is that your certificate is standalone. And it says, I cannot verify the first certificate. I don't know who authorized the certificate. So if you go over to the file menu up at the upper left, all the way up to the upper left, file, and you go into settings, and you see the second option, it says SSL certificate verification.
Yeah.
Disable that. And then go ahead and close this. And then hit that send button again. Oh,
Then we're in business.
now we're in business. So this same interface with Postman, let's go back to the browser. Swagger does the same thing. So if you hit on the try it out button, and then you go ahead and execute, you'll get the same data. It's randomized, so it'll be a different response, but it's the same format. So you can use Swagger, which comes pre-configured with your API application, or if you don't want to deal with it, you can go to Postman. And there's reasons for both, okay? You don't have to do one or the other exclusively. You can use them in combination. This Swagger API is great for documentation because if you go back to Postman, there is no documentation. You have to know the inputs, the outputs, the whole thing. If you go back to the browser, it gives you some feedback. It tells you, it's like, hey, this is the address. This is what we're sending in. This is what you're going to be receiving back and all that stuff. So it gives you a little bit more information. So it's great for documentation purposes only. You do not ever want to release this into some production environment, because in a production environment, you want to be as obfuscated as possible. Security and obfuscation are not the same thing, but the less information a perpetrator knows about your API, the less is the possibility that they'll be able to hack your API. So if they don't know anything about the API, then they won't be able to hack it as easy. Where if you present this information in a public website, they're like, oh, we know some vulnerabilities that we can exploit here, you know, because you're giving them the keys to the kingdom here of like what it is that they need to do. And so they can easily crash your server. They can exploit it in different ways, you know, figure out what server you're using and, you know, go find vulnerabilities to exploit and stuff like that. So again, great for internal documentation, never to be released on a production server. Postman, a whole different story, right? You have a completely separate product that you're using, and you can exchange the APIs with other people that are using Postman. Does that make sense? You with me on that?
Makes sense.
Okay. As we start playing around with it more, you'll start seeing. So let's go back to oh well, let's talk about what happened here. It's like when you created a project, you hit run, and all of a sudden it's like you're getting this weather data. What the heck, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Essentially what they're doing is they're just giving you like some default API with random data. It's not communicating anywhere. It's like literally just random data. And this random data gets generated and it gets sent back from the API. And it's just a way for you to know that, hey, the template is working. You know, the project is working. It's up to you to now go and create your API and create your own endpoints. Okay. So let's go ahead and close this browser. And let's go back to Visual Studio. And let's go ahead and close all these tabs. Just right click on one of them and close all tabs. And let's expand the significant API. And inside controllers, expand controllers. This is your weather forecast controller, right? So let's right click on controllers. And let's add a new controller. So you see up on the left-hand side, we're going to go up to the API. And we're going to create an empty one.
Okay.
And let's call this in your repository. What can you expand repository? I guess we can cancel this for a moment. Cancel. Expand your repository project. Okay, so this is birthday. So we need to create a birthday controller.
Okay.
You're a natural, Jonathan. Birth date controller. No space, capital C. Man, look at that.
Wow.
So let's go ahead and this is your class. So let's go ahead and press and start a new line after line 13. And we're going to create a method to go and get all the data for the birthdays. Okay. So if you expand the birthday repository even more, let's go look at some of those methods. Expanded more. No, you see after it says birthday repository, keep on expanding that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go do a get all.
Okay.
But we're going to call that get all from the API. We're going to go step by step. All right. The first thing we got to do is we got to get this API to work. All right. So let's go ahead and create a public. And this public is going to return I action result, all one word, capital I, capital A. There you go, that one. And we're going to call it get all birthdays. Open, close parenthesis, open, close your curly braces. And then let's start working. Oh, the curly braces go after the parentheses. And that represents the body of the method. So in here, okay, we are going to return a list of birthdays. So let's go ahead and let's add a reference to the significant API. We need to add a reference to the repository project and the data project.
Okay.
So right click on significant API. and add project reference. And models and repository, not
Nice.
data. And hit OK. All right. So you're going to say var repo equals new birth date repository. You're going to have to spell it correctly in order for it to recognize. Birth date repository.
Birth date
Repository.
repository.
And if you do a control period, it'll give you the help menu. Yep, we want to bring in the using significant repository. So click on that first one. And then open close parenthesis to call the constructor. And then terminate that with the semicolon. So now we got a reference to the birthday repository. Okay, so let's go ahead and press enter, start a new line. And we're going to send back, or we're going to create a new variable call it B days, BDAYS, B days equals, and that's going to equal to the repo.getAll. So whatever getAll is returning, you want that return to be assigned to B days. And then open close parenthesis, semicolon. And then press enter. And then you're going to return. And now because we're returning an iAction, these APIs, what you're returning are error codes. You're either returning a series of 200s, 300s, 400s, or 500s. And each one of those has a designation. Any 200 code that gets sent back is pretty much the server saying, okay, here's your data. Here you go. Any 300s that is returning, it says, get out of here. He's not here. He's over there. So it's like a reroute. It's like it's rerouting it. Any 400 that is being returned by the server, it's saying, you as a user, you fucked up. Any 500 that is returned by the server is basically saying, me as a server, I fucked up. So there's like those error codes, you know, in order to saying, here you go, get out of here, scat, he's over there. You fucked up, I fucked up. Those are the ways that I remember them. And they're like very easy to remember that way. There is a website that gives you all the error codes, but ASP.NET makes it very easy because they're using actual methods to say, you're going to return an OK. So you could just type in return space OK. And then OK is a method. So just go ahead and open close parenthesis. And then inside the parentheses, you could return B days. So not only do you return the 200, you can also return data. And even though birthdays is a C# object, because we're building an API, the API knows that it needs to convert that into a JSON data format.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You with me on that? Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and run this. Oh, whoa. One more thing. We need to tell what this method is going to return. So there's this concept of a decorator, okay? So right above public, so go ahead and go above public and start a new line. Inside of square brackets, so open close square brackets, you're going to type in HTTP get. Yep, that's it right there. And then just so that we have our code cleaned up, let's right click anywhere in the document and sort and remove and sort usings. The third option. Yeah. So it'll remove all those references that are not being used. Let's run this and let's see what it does.
Okay. Oh, there it is.
There it is. Go ahead and click on the blue. Try it out. And execute. What?
Whoa.
Fix your browser so it doesn't go off the screen.
Okay.
Is that your data?
Yeah. That's all my data. Jerry Springer, he's in there.
That's pretty cool, huh?
That's pretty cool, yeah. Wow.
That wasn't very hard either.
No.
I mean, because we broke this up into layers so that, you know, we can separate the clients from the server itself, right? It makes it so you can see. I'll go back to the analogy or my demonstration of we're gonna rip the console application into just turn it into an API, and then we're gonna create a website. Does that make sense now?
Mm-hmm.
Versus the okay you gave me last time. I know I was being so dramatic when I did this right here, you know, but it was at it was an epic okay, you know, you're like, okay. But you see where we're going with this now.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's take that URL. You see the request URL? Just copy that whole thing right there. And go put it in Postman. And plug that in there.
Cool. Yeah.
Let's go to Chrome.
Okay.
And open up a new tab here. Go ahead and crank open a new tab and just paste that in there. Imagine you have some HTML that can go and make the call behind the scenes, grab this, and then display it nice and pretty in some HTML with some bootstrap styling.
Yeah.
You see that same mental picture I got?
See that?
That's where we're going. So that's this right here. I'm ripping off the console application, creating an API, and then creating a website. So that console application no longer exists. We're going to separate it into two different technologies instead of just a console. We're going to use modern programming to display the data. But there's a couple of things, okay? There's a couple of things that are what do you call it? We hard coded some stuff that I think we need to unhard code, and we need to make it a little bit more configurable, because if we were to ever post this as a website, then what would happen is that the connection string is pointing to your local machine. Unfortunately, if we were to go deploy this from like Azure or AWS, it cannot access your local machine. And it doesn't have a local machine for it to go and access a database. It's actually going to give you a name of a server that you need to access. And so we need to make that configurable. So let's go ahead and shut down the browser here. And we're going to make that connection string configurable. Let's go back to Visual Studio. So in here, you see the app settings.json, the file?
Yeah.
App settings.json. Go ahead and open that up.
Wait. App settings?
Yeah, on the right-hand side, app settings.json. Right below the weather forecast. Yep, double click on that. So Does the, yeah, go ahead and hit yes. So does this look familiar? What format, what data format is this?
This is HTML.
No, it's your buddy's name.
Oh, my buddy Jason.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the data format, JSON. So what they did is they put it into a file. And they're using this as a configuration file. So we can go within our code, we can go and read this information and we can change it at any given point in time and say, okay, I want to change this because I want to point somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So let's add a new node. So go to line 1, press enter. And then inside of double quotes, type in connection strings. I think it's going to require a capital C.
Okay.
And then in connection strings is actually not going to be double quotes. It's going to be another object. So colon and then curly braces. And then go ahead and press enter so that we can start the body. Oh, you're going to need a comma after that curly brace. Yeah, the one on the bottom.
Comma.
Yeah, cool. Because connection strings and logging are two different objects inside the main object. So in here, you're going to type in inside of double quotes again, it's default connection. Now, this is not something that has to be this way. It's just kind of a default that gets always put in there. It's just called a default connection. We can call it whatever. We can call it Jonathan's connection. We can call it Victor's connection. We can call it the dump connection. We can call it the SQL connection. We can call it whatever we want to call it. But default connection just happens to be something that has been put in there as a way like saying, hey, if you're going to connect anywhere, this is probably the connection you want to use. You know what I mean? So with colon inside of double quotes, we need to go over to the birthday repository and grab that connection string. So open up the birthday repository.
Okay. So it would be.
Yeah, just double click on it. The birthday repository. Did we not do it here or where did we? Oh, it's actually in the data. Sorry, not the repository. Yeah, expand the data. And let's open up birthdays. You see that connection string up on top? Copy what's inside of those double quotes. And put it inside the app settings.json file. Whoa, what happened to the...
Oh, it's this one.
Oh. All right, let's save all this. And then the other thing that we need to do is we need to take advantage of a feature. Well, first of all, let's go into the birth dates, into the significant data birth dates.
Significant data birth dates.
And in here, do a control MO in order to collapse all the methods. And what we're going to do is we are going to create a constructor. So at line 108, go to the very end of line 108 and press enter. And press enter again. And then type in CTOR, C-T-O-R. Just like Victor, but just CTOR. And then tab twice. And this creates this creates a constructor. So remember I told you about constructors that they normally come by default. They're free of charge. They don't charge you anything. You get them for free. But when you create your own, Now you have to implement your own data in here, right? And what we want to do is we actually want to initiate that connection string from the constructor. So we're going to pass it in. We're no longer going to hard code it, because if we hard code it, then this requires a recompilation of the application. So right click on constring. So this is kind of like the whole thing. Like, we want you to inject yourselves into each other. I don't want to have to deal with what dependencies you need. And in order to do that, we need to use a service called Dependency Injection, or it's a pattern that comes from this concept called inversion of control. So let's say, for example, the birthday repository. The birthday repository is dependent on significant.data.birthdates. It's dependent, okay? It doesn't know where to get it. So what it's going to do, it's going to invert control to a third party. That third party is going to say, let me build you, okay? And when I build you, I'm going to inject the dependencies into you by passing it through your constructor.
Okay.
And so as it builds it, it inspects the object and it says, what are the dependencies that you're waiting for? And it's going to say, you want an iBirthdates object. Let me go get that. Before I finish building you, let me go get that. So it looks at the iBirthdates and it says, what is your type? It's going to say, well, I'm a birthdate object. It says, okay, let me go and build you. Do you have any dependents? And the birthdate object is going to say, yeah, I need a connection string. It says, let me go get that for you. So it goes and grabs the connection string from the configuration, injects it into the significant.data.birthdates, and it brings that birthdates object and then injects that birthdates object into the birthday repository object. And then once it does that, it's going to inject it into the birthday.controller object. It said, okay, birthday.controller, let me go ahead and build you. But I have a whole chain of dependencies that you're going to need. Let me go ahead and inject those into you as well. So that as you code, you can just say, I know these objects are going to exist because I inverted control to a third party that's going to take care of all those dependencies for me. Otherwise, you have to go and pass down all the information to each individual one of the objects. And the birthday repository may never use the connection string, but the fact that you have to pass it in is useless. It's a pain. Like, you shouldn't have to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So by using this dependency injection service, it takes care of all that for you. Okay, so there's no magic going on. It's literally inspecting your objects in order to get all that done. And then what happens is that it'll cache, it'll keep in memory whatever it can, so that the next time it goes to build those objects, it does it slickety split, you know, like really quick. All right. But in order to do that, we needed to create these interface classes, because the dependency injection doesn't care what color you're going to paint my house, and it doesn't care how I'm going to get the $200 to you. It just says, I need you to paint the house and I need you to pay $200. And that's all I care about. The implementation, whether you Zelle him, whether you give him a check, whether you give him a preloaded credit card, I do not care. You could paint his house pink, you could paint it blue, red, orange. I do not care. I just care that you paint the house and you pay $200. And that's where these interfaces come in. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
All right. So how do we do that? We have to go to the startup.cs file in the significant API. Oh, wait. Can we go to the birthday controller really quick? Okay. So instead of building the birthday repository, let's create a private member. So after line 9, create a new. We need to also create an interface class for the birthday repository. So go to birthday repository. Down at the bottom. And in here on line 9, right click and extract the interface. Quick actions and refactoring. And then extract interface. Perfect.
Okay.
Hit OK. All right. Okay, so let's go to the birthday controller.
Control.
And let's create a private member, and it's going to be of type iBirthdate repository. And then let's call it _birthdate repository, lowercase b, uppercase R. Give it a space in between iBirthdays and _birthdays. And that's going to be a lowercase b. And then finish that off with the semicolon. We need to do a couple of mappings. We need to go and tell it that iBirthdates is a type of birthday, and iRepository birthdays is a type of birthday repository. Sorry, iBirthday repository is a type of a birthday repository. So on the next line, go ahead and press enter. We're going to use, you see on line 27, there's services. We're going to use those services. So services dot sweet. Okay, so the services at scope, this is the inversion of control. You're inverting control to these services. And they're in charge. That service is in charge of building your birthday repository and building your birthday data, your data object, and injecting that connection string. So it's going to go through, and just the way I explained it, right? It says, controller, you need a birthday repository. Let me go get that. So it news up the birthday repository, says, oh, wait a second, you need an iBirthdates object. So it says, let me go get that first. So it goes and gets the iBirthday. It says, wait a second, you need a connection string. I remember I said, there's no such thing as a flying car. The rubber always hits the road, right? So here, when we go and build an iBirthday object, we're sending in the connection string through the configuration. So this is where the rubber hits the road. Now, if we were using some other method, like say Entity Framework would then have its own method of having the rubber hit the road. And that would take different configuration. That would take a little bit of a different programming aspect. For this purpose, this is how we're going to do it. Let's run it. Let's see what happens.
Here it goes.
Run it. Can't believe I admitted that I have notes. Did it work?
It's working.
Holy freaking smoke.
Wow.
Pretty amazing, huh?
Yeah.
Cool.
That was it.
That was it. So here's, can you go back to the birthday controller? Pretty straightforward. I'm going to give you, no, you know what? We'll save it for the next podcast.
All right.
We'll do, I think this episode 12 is going to be broken up into several parts, just like we did episode 10, because we're really covering we're going deep into the trenches here.
We're going deep, yeah.
So we're using configuration, we're using middleware, we're using dependency injection, inversion of control. We're like telling the system, it's like, go build these things for us. I don't want to even bother with it, And you can see that by handing over the control to these well-structured patterns, makes your coding a lot easier. I mean, look how easy, 2 lines of code to go get it, right?
Yep.
pretty freaking awesome. All right. I think we need to do one last thing before we close up.
Okay.
We need to do some exception handling. So remember how you go down the happy path, but that happy path at some point is going to become sad, and you're going to get exceptional behavior. Errors are going to get thrown, and you need to be able to deal with them, right? So let's highlight lines 15 and 16. Right click on there. Go down to the part where it says snippet and surround with, and then type in reply. So yeah, this is it. This is how you would break away from the console and create a application programming interface so that we can go and create a web page and connect to that API, grab the data, use some JavaScript to go and put it into the HTML, and yeah, and we'd be done with it. So
cool.
All right.
Yeah.
I think this is a good place to close this up. Any final thoughts?
This is a lot of steps to make it easier, though.
That is true, but all your other code, all you got to do is deal with the birthday controller.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. Plus, I think I probably, I don't know. I mean, not to be modest or anything. I think I'm just familiar with the code to make it easier, which is probably doesn't help you because I'm just making it easy for you. But yeah, this is how it's done. So,
Cool.
All right.
Yeah.
Until next time, don't forget, click, like, subscribe, and win some free merchandise. Huh?
Yeah. Got some merch.
That's right. We'll see you guys on the next show. Bye-bye.
Road to code.